This is the recording of the Amud Yomi share. Today we are doing Lamed Amud Aleph, and we are not doing this live, but nevertheless, hopefully, still be able to cover off. We are starting from Chavtes and Beis, the last words on the page. Amar Abaya, the song Amar Abaya, Amar Abaya. Yeah, okay. So Amar Abaya La'olam L'Shatif Inish Nafshe B'Hadit Tzibura. Person should always partner up when they are davening. They should daven together with the tzibur. They should be, says Rashi, Al Yispal Tefillah Ketzar B'Lashon Yachid. A person shouldn't daven a Tefillah Ketzara B'Lashon Yachid, but rather B'Lashon Rabbim Shemitech Kach Tefillas Nishmas, because when you daven with the Lashon Rabbim, then your tefillah will be heard. So again, Abai is telling us a halacha. It relates to the tefillah k'tzar that we were mentioning before, and we said over the various different versions. Tzarchi amcha merubim, shama shavas amcha Yisrael, aseh ritzencha v'shamayim yel, aseh nachas ruach v'livrei echa. These are all plural. So Abai is saying, Amar Abai, la'olam l'shatev inish nafshim ha'ditzur. A person should always be associating himself with the tzibur. Why should he be associating himself with the tzibur? Because of the fact that his prayers are more likely than to be answered than when he does it b'yachid. Says the Gemara says Heichanemin. So how should you say when it comes to tefillah derech Yiratzon L'fanecha Hashem Elokeinu shetalichenu l'shalom, not just shetalichi l'shalom, shetalichenu l'shalom, tatzideinu l'shalom. It should be for everybody. So a person should restart himself and the tzibur. Of course, the more person can do it with the tzibur, davening with the tzibur is of course the most ideal. This also reminds one of the psukim in the Navi and Malachim when Elisha is telling the Shunamis, what can I do for you? Right? Elisha said to the Shunamis, "Ma la'ases lach l'daber al melech el sarat tzava," and she said, "V'soich ami anechi yeshaves." So over there, the Malbim writes that um, Elisha was offering her, "Should I speak to you, l'malka shalom? Should I speak to you? Should I speak on your behalf to the Rebbeinu Shalom?" And she responds and says, "No, v'hi yeshiva she'ena ratzah lifresh min ha'klal." She doesn't want to separate herself out from the cloud. Rather, she wants to have a tefillah for herself that will be nichlal within the tzibur. Right? Somebody's parashas from that tzibur can end up getting too much of a close gaze. So the best thing is to do is to attach oneself to the tzibur. Now the Gemara asks a question. So okay, we made it clear that when a person goes on a trip, they have to say Tfilas Hadarach. But when do you say Tfilas Hadarach? Says the Gemara, Emas Matli. When do you say Tfilas Hadarach? So the Gemara says, Amar Yaakov, Amar Rav Chizda, Mishosh Mahalach B'derech. When you leave, when you leave your house, that's when you can start saying Tfilas Hadarach. Ad Kama, how much time do you have to say Tfilas Hadarach? Meaning, on your journey, how much time do you have to be able to say Tfilas Hadarach? Amar Rav Yaakov, Amar Rav Yaakov, Amar Rav Chizda, Ad Parsa. You have until a parsa. But as Rashi explains, avaloi la'acha shalach parsa. But the first understanding of Rashi is that after you've traveled the parsa, you've already gone on the road, so then you should not be saying tefillas haderech. However, there's a different understanding as well. The Bahag, Rashi brings down the Bahag and Farsh ad kam mivagish lelech sheyei tzarich l'spalel ad parsa. Excuse me, afilu ein lo lelech el ad parsa. Aval derech pachas mi parsa ein tzarich l'spal tefillah zu. So the Bahag says that it's not that you have until a parsa to daven, but rather only on a journey that's going to take a parsa, you have to say the tefillah derech. But if your journey is not going to be a parsa, it's less than a parsa, so then you do not have to say tefillah derech. So again, that will be a fundamental dispute as to when do you say tefillah derech? Do you have only up until a parsa? In which case, it sounds like regardless of what your trip is, you only have until a parsa, according to the first opinion. According to the second opinion, if your trip is less than a parsa, you don't say tefillah derech. If your trip is more than a parsa, then you could say it. There's no time limit as to when you're able to say it. The Ben goes with the Bahag in his understanding. And he says, I feel even if your das is not to go parsa, then you can still say tefes derech, which I'm sorry, that would be like the first part of Rashi, but he says, "V'chol sheken yoser, avo pachas loy." But if you didn't have das to go at least to parsa, I'm sorry, I'm correct. Um, as long as your trip is at least a parsa, then you can say tefes derech. But less than that, you cannot. Whereas according to the first opinion, you can only say tefillas derech until you travel parsa, after which you can no longer say tefillas derech. Now the Gemara says Rav Chizda Amar. Now we're not going to Rav Yaakov. Then Rav Chizda now saying Rav Chizda directly. So Rav Chizda Amar Me'uman Ve'echi Matzila. What's the format? You're supposed to be standing, sitting when you say tefillas derech. Rav Chizda Amar Me'uman. Rav Chizda said you should be standing when you say tefillas hadarach. Rav Sheshes Amar afilu mahalach. Rav Sheshes says you could say it even when you're in the middle of the road going, so you don't have to stop and stand to say tefillas hadarach. The Gemara gives us a story. Rav Chizda, Rav Sheshes Havika Azli Be'orcha. Rav Chizda and Rav Sheshes were going on the road, and then what happened was, Kam Rav Chizda v'Kamatzli. So Rav Chizda got up to say tefillas hadarach as he had said. Rav Sheshes says to the person who was with him, my cover Rav Chizda, what's Rav Chizda doing? So Amalek Kamatzli, he is saying Tfilas Haderech. So Amalek Ukmanami Ladidi. So Rav Sheshes says, let's also get up. V'atzlin, we should say Tfilas Haderech, even though Rav Sheshes said that you could do a Mahalach. Now, why did Rav Sheshes ask what Rav Chizda was doing? Why didn't he see? Because Rav Sheshes was Ma'arinaim, he was blind. And so, if he holds that it's not necessary to stand and to stop when one is riding, so why did he? So he says, "Miyais about tikura," right? In other words, as Rashi explains, since I'm able to stand over here and I have Rav Chizda standing and stopping, so I don't want to be called like a bad neighbor by saying the tefillas haderech while I'm moving. So I should also stop, even though it's mutter. He nevertheless stopped, stood, and said tefillas haderech. So Rutaisis points out, "Ve'echi matzila tefillas haderech." We're asking how did he daven? We're talking about the tefillas haderech. Rav Sheshes holds that you could do it even while you're riding, while you're driving. But the kaim like Rav Sheshes says Taisvis, we actually do pass like Rav Sheshes. You don't have to stop and stand when you say Tfilas Haderech. Umiu b'Taisvis pasuk Rav Yosef Rav Chizda. It sounds like in the Tosefta, the Rabbi Yosef pasuk Rav Chizda, or maybe it's a Taisvis. He means I'm not sure. V'chein Rav Alphas Persian Rav Chizda diful itzvei. And the Rif also passes like Rav Chizda that. It's better to be stopping and to stand when you say Tfilas Haderech. Fine, continues the Gemara. My Ika bein Havinenu Tefillah Kitzar. We have mentioned now a number of places that there is a tefillah called Havinenu, and we mentioned that there's something called a tefillah Kitzar. If you recall back on Gimel Mel Aleph, there was a machlokes there, at least a few machlokes between Rashi and Taisus about this, and it ended up that Taisus agreed with Rashi, but the Gemara over there had said that what do you call the Rabbi Yossi had gone to daven in the churba, and Yonavi waited for him. And he learned three things from that experience. One was that the halacha was I learned that you are not supposed to go into a room. I learned you're allowed to daven on the road. And the person who's davening on the road should daven the tefillah k'tzar. Rashi had said that tefillah k'tzar was havinenu. Taisus says it wasn't havinenu, but rather it was murum tzarchei amcha. In the end, Taisus agreed that it was probably havinenu, and the Rashi was correct. So the Gemara wants to know what's the difference between havinenu and tefillah k'tzar. So the Gemara explains havinenu. Havinenu, Havinenu requires the first three brachas and the last three brachas. And when you come back to your house, you don't have to daven anymore. Havinenu takes care of everything. Havinenu is a regular tefillah. As we said, the Gemara previously on Chav Tes Amud Aleph, we had discussed what did it mean? Me'ain Shemana Esrei. So there was a machlekes over there. Either it was Me'ain Kol Bracha Bracha or it was Havinenu. What was Havinenu? Havinenu Hashem Ladas Rachecha Mosle Vaven Liyorasech. Right, it took every single part of the middle of the 18 brachas. Right, we have six brachas that are the same, three in the beginning, three in the end. But aside from those, six brachas, you have 12 brachas that are essentially condensed, and that becomes the Havinenu. And you say at the end of that, Havinenu, you start out with, and you say Baruch Hashem Shemei Tefillah, and that is sort of your middle 12 brachas. So, and of course, the Gemara is now asking, what's the difference between Havinenu and the Tefillah Ketzar? So Havinenu is the three first and the last three brachas, and the middle is this condensed version of each and every bracha. It takes a couple of words from it. And when you daven Havinenu, when you come to your house, you do not have to daven another Shemona Esrei because you have already been Yaitzezayin. And as we said in the Gemara in Chav Tes, that Abai wasn't happy. Lied Allah Abai, Amanda Masle Havinenu. Well, Abai was very upset at people who would say Havinenu, and there were other opinions that disagreed, right? That, for example, let's say in the Mishu, that Kol Kul Mispal Al Havinenu Chutz Moishe Shabbos Motziyom Tov, that a person could say Havinenu throughout the year. Okay, so the Gemara then says, what is about a Tefillah Ketzar? But Tefillah Ketzar, Lo Yiboy Tzlu Lo Gimel Kamayis Lo Gimel Masraisa. By the Tefillah Ketzar, Merubim Tzarchei Amcha, you don't say the three first brachas or the three last brachas. You just say the Merubim Tzarchei Amcha, right? V'datem Ketzar, you just say over this short tefillah, and when you say over that short tefillah, that's sufficient for that moment, right? But when you get home, when you get home, you do have to daven the regular full Shemona Esrei. And the Gemara concludes, when you daven Havinenu, you should do it standing up like a regular Shemona Esrei. And you can do it Tefillah Ketzar even when you're standing, or whether you are in the middle of going. You don't have to stop. So Taisus says, "My Ika ben Havinenu Tefillah Ketzar." So we're now looking at the Taisus here on Lamed. Taisus says, "Tema, I don't understand. You're telling me what the difference between Havinenu and Tefillah Ketzar is that when you come home, do you have to say Shemona Esrei or not?" Again, so it says I have a different one. Tema ulema de Ika ben Havinenu Tefillah Ketzar ena mispal of makom sakana. Havinenu mispal afilu shalom makom sakana. Maybe to say the difference is that the Tefillah Ketzar is you only daven it during a time of sakana, but Havinenu you can daven even when it's not sakana. Says Taisvis, no. V'yeshlam dehachi kabay my benal kol echad b'mkamay Tefillah Ketzar b'makom sakana Havinenu shalom b'makom sakana. We're not, of course, the Havinenu prayer can be used even when it's not a sakana. Again, Abai is not happy with those who do it, but in theory, it works. Even if it's not a sakana, it's not something that should be normally used, but it can be used. Whereas Havinenu it can be used even on a makom sakana, and there's a debate about whether or not it should or shouldn't be utilized to any degree, even when it's not an exigent situation. What is clear is that the Mum Tzarchei is only to be used in the makom sakana. We're not, that's not a debate. Tais wants to say, well, let's say that's an nafkamina. We knew that. We know that going in. Our question is, what's the nafkamina, not how you utilize Havinenu and Tefillah Ketzara. Of course, Havinenu is only is in any situation, if you'd like to say it, and Tefillah Ketzara is only in a Makom Sakana. The question is, with that being said, in a Makom Sakana, where you said Tefillah Ketzara, what is the difference in the sense of, are you done now with your Shemona Esrei? Do you have to say it over when you get to a calmer place? The answer is yes. Havinenu, which you could say at any point, is not a sakana. It's a full Shemona Esrei, even though it's a shortened version. You do not have to come and say it over again when you get home to your house. That therefore you are sufficiently satisfied with this as the nafkamina. Now, going back to the Taisvas and the Rashi and Gimel Amud Aleph, we had pointed out over there that um, the Rabbi Yossi who was standing in the road, he didn't want to be stared by people, so therefore he went to go stand in the churva, which he shouldn't have done because churvas are dangerous and he had to rely on an ace essentially to be safe. But had he stayed in the road, so what should he have done? He should have been mispelled tefillah kitzara. But at that point in time, what was he afraid of? He was afraid, says the Gemara, Shem Yafsiku bi Arvei Derachim. He was afraid that passers-by would bug him. Not that he was afraid of listim. He wasn't afraid of a sakana. He was just afraid of being annoyed. So people would annoy him. People would make noise. They were stairs davening, whatever. So Eliana was teaching him, we should say it's tefillah kitzar. So this is not a sakana. This is a situation of being annoyed, of having people stare at davening. So how could it be that Rashi's saying that it's Havinenu? Tes is agreeing that it's Havinenu. If it's a Tefillah Ketzara and I'm not a Makom Sakana, then it probably should mean that we're dealing with Havinenu. Not, I'm sorry. I'm saying that's a question. I really should have said it at the end. So the reason that Tosfos agrees with the Rashi is because that's how this Gemara is coming out. The Havinenu, you say, even if it's not a Makom Sakana. So therefore, Rabbi Yossi was standing in the churva because he didn't want to be disturbed by people. He didn't have a sakana. He had a situation. He didn't want to be bothered. So he's telling him that you daven the tefillah ketzara, so that you shouldn't be bothered. Daven the tefillah ketzara. Rashi said that was havinenu. It's exactly perfect. That should be havinenu because it's not mum sarche amcha. Because we're coming out that Tosfos wants to say over here that that's only going to be in a situation of a sakana. You shouldn't be saying mum sarche amcha if it's not a sakana. So therefore, the Gemara in Gimel, which wasn't a sakana, Tosfos concludes with Rashi, that Rashi is correct, even though we don't use the lashon of havinenu, that tefillah ketzara was referring to havinenu. Okay, continues the Gemara, and the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says we are now at the two dots. So it says the Gemara, if somebody was riding on a donkey. So we're going back to the Mishnah here, that if somebody was riding on a donkey, so one of the Mishnah tell us that the halach was if somebody is going in various different traveling in various ways. So Yard v'Yispal, he should get down. This is the Mishnah of Chesam Beis. He should come down off the donkey and he should daven. If he cannot come down, so then Yachzer Espanov, he should turn his face towards the Kodesh Kedoshim, and that's sufficient. And if he can't do that, then he should just have in mind that Beis Kodesh Kedoshim. So now the Gemara says as follows. If somebody's going on a donkey, somebody was going on a donkey, and the Zman Tefillah occurs. So, so if he has somebody who's able to hold on to his donkey for him, so Yer L'matav Yispal. In other words, if he could manage to stop the caravan, hold the donkey, etc., then he should daven when he comes off the donkey, right? Which is what the Mishnah said. Right? If somebody was riding on the donkey, he should come down. It was only the many yachal then he should be maxim panav. Ve'im lav, he should become mispal. And if he cannot, he should come, just continue on sitting on the donkey and daven. So the Tanakama seems to be going with the Mishnah. Rabbi disagrees with what we said in the Mishnah. Says Rabbi, even if you have somebody to take the donkey and to stop the caravan or whatever it is, nevertheless you can still just continue in place and daven. You can continue riding on the donkey and davening. Why? The fish ain't alav, because the person's mind is not going to be at ease. Why not? Says Rashi, Shekosha alav yikuader, because it's very hard for them given the fact that they're on the road. Amar Rabbi Tamer Rabbi Shimon Levi. Halacha Rabbi. Halacha is like Rabbi. Now let's look at Taisus for a minute. It says Taisus Halacha Rabbi Shel Yorad Lamata, that you don't have to go down from the donkey. Vafilu Shelo Makom Sakana, even if there's no sakana at all. Vafilu Mahalach Misbal, even though the donkey is still riding, you can still daven. Shemana Asher and Tzarach LaAsher Panach Yerushalayim. You don't have to turn your face to Yerushalayim. So Rabbi disagrees with the Mishnah. Only the halacha says the Gemara is like Rabbi. Now, if someone is going on a donkey, he is able to simply stay on the donkey and daven the Shemana Esrei, and that's okay. He does not have to get off. And that's even though he has somebody who could hold the donkey, he has somebody who could hold the caravan. There's no issues with all that. Nevertheless, he doesn't have to get off the donkey, keep on going and daven. This makes me a question. I think that we should ask the following question. If you look back on Tezayim and Aleph, the Gemara told us over there a situation about people who had to daven while they were working in the fields. And the Gemara said, this is Tezayim and Aleph right after the Mishnah. When it came to Shema, the workers, they can say the Shema despite like if they're in a tree. But but they can only daven Shemana Esrei in certain trees, which are like the zayas or the ta'ina, right? The fig or the olive tree, which I guess have a broad canopy, and they're able to focus and not fall. Other types of trees which don't have such, I guess, broad canopies, they have to come down off the tree in order to daven. No balabais, and we said that the balabas has to come down and daven, as Rashi explained. I'm sorry, the Gemara continues. Because his mind is not settled on him to daven while he's up in the tree. Says Rashi. What do we mean by this? We mean as follows. We are going to have a certain sympathy for the workers who have to work. So we're making on them that when there's a tree which is on Fan Merubim, and they're able to stand there without too much problem, and they're not too scared of falling. So therefore, therefore they're allowed to daven at the top of the trees. But Bashari Lanas, where they don't have such good canopies, then we say no. But the Balabayas who's here to make money, he's not a worker. Says Rashi, so because he's his own Rishus, because he's not so comfortable, he's scared, he doesn't, feel that comfortable standing in the middle of a tree. So just because we're making for the pylon, like it's a Balabayas. We're not making for the Balabayas. So in other words, we make the Balabayas come off the tree, because his mind is not settled. So I don't understand. The Gemara in Tez Zion is telling us that because the Ficha ain't Daitim Yeshavas, he has to come off the tree in order to daven. But Rebbe's telling us that by the donkey, the Ficha ain't Daitim Yeshavas, he's able to stay on the donkey. He's able to stay on the donkey. What do you mean? Come off the donkey, and if you come off the donkey, you'll have your das will be more Yeshavas. Right? What do we mean that Rebbe's not requiring you? Like the Mishnah said, like the Tanna Kama says, if somebody's riding on a donkey and you have somebody to hold the donkey, somebody could hold the caravan, so then have them do it and come down. So Lamai, you have to say that the answer is that, and this is what Rebbe is saying. When Rebbe is saying, Benkach Yoshev B'mkam Yispal V'Shein Datim Yishavas Alav, Rebbe is saying, even if he comes off the donkey, it's ain't Daitim Yishavas Alav. When the guy in Tezayin is coming off the tree, then it's Daitim Yishavas Alav, he's going to have Kavanah. But when the guy comes off the donkey and somebody else is holding the donkey, the caravan is waiting, it's still not Daitim Yishavas Alav, says Rashi. Shein Daitim Yishavas Alav, Shekasha Alav Ikuv Derech, because the road is very hard. The traveling is a big challenge. And that the fact that you came down now off the donkey doesn't mean that you're not traveling still. You're still traveling, so it's still ain't Daitim Yishavas Alav. It's sort of like an anan sadi to this idea. Says Rabbi, therefore we don't go with the Mishnah. And in fact, the person, when he's traveling on the road, does not have to come off the donkey in order to be able to daven, because it will not benefit at all. He will still not be Daitim Yishavas Alav, and therefore he will still not have kavanah sufficiently, and therefore we don't require it. Finish the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan Suma. A blind person, and somebody who's not able to figure out which direction he's davening in, so Yechavin Liboy Keneged Aviv Sheba Shemayim. He should have it in his mind, he should have it in his heart to daven Keneged his father in heaven. If he doesn't daven east, west, north, or south, wherever they are, he says just have kavanah for his father in heaven. Shnem V'Spalo El Hashem. This is all from the Psukim of Melachim by the inauguration of the temple. So the pasuk tells us V'Spalo El Hashem. They dive into their Bereshlam. I mean b'chutz la'aretz. Somebody is generally standing in chutz la'aretz. They should be turned towards Eretz Yisrael. So if you're the north of Eretz, should be facing south. The west should be facing east. East should be facing west. South should be facing north, etc. Shneemar Nispalo Elecha Derech Artzam. Right, they're going to daven derech their land. Ha'amim b'aretz Yisrael Yechavim Sivkei Yerushalayim. Shneem Nispalo Hashem Derech Ha'ir. Asher B'charta. Right, if somebody is in the Eretz Yisrael, you daven towards Yerushalayim. Ha'amim b'Yerushalayim. If somebody is standing in Yerushalayim, Yechavim Sivkei Keneged Beis HaMikdash. So then he should be davening towards the Beis HaMikdash. Shneem Nispalo Bayis Hazeh. Ha'amim b'Beis HaMikdash. Right, if somebody is actually standing inside the Beis HaMikdash. He should have kavanah towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So you're talking now about a Kayan who is standing in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So what direction should he daven in? He should have his face turned to the Beis HaKaparis. Again, the Kayan Gadol will come into Kodesh HaKadoshim once a year. Doesn't daven Shemon Esrei, he's not davening regular davening. Presumably, this is the tefillah the Kohen Gadol says. In what direction should he face when he says it? So when somebody's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he should have his kavanah towards the kaparis. Again, this is the first Beis HaMikdash when there was the kaparis. The second Beis HaMikdash was just an Evan There was nothing there. When somebody's standing behind the kaparis, Rashi says if he's behind the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Ma'ariv HaZarah. Have a yud alav amachatzer mikaisa b'skash shegelash mikaisa maravi shal. So there was some place for a person to stand behind the kapar. So then you're after kiluf negaparis. He should see himself as though he's in front of the kaparis, and to daven in that manner. Nimtza imer b'mizrach machsa panav l'mayr. If someone's standing in the east, he's going to be turning his face to the west. L'mayr machsa panav l'mizrach, b'dar machsa panav l'tzav, l'tzav machsa panav l'dar. All the Jews are going to be facing united towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim when they pray. Avina, Mikra, Kemigdal David, Savarech, Banu Talpios, Tel Shakol Pios Painim by. What does it mean in Pasuk? When the Pasuk says that the Tower of David is your neck, the Talpios. What does it mean? The Talpios? So it sounds like a tower with mouths. Tel Shakol Pios Painim by. It's the tower that all the mouths are turned to. In other words, in davening. Says the Taisves, I made b'chutz. So somebody is standing in chutz la'aretz, Yechavin Keneged Eretz Yisrael. They should be turned towards Eretz Yisrael. And v'loig seen in Libay the panav kardik tani sefer hayam b'mizrach ma'ar master panav l'ma'ar. Fine. L'tal piyas tel shekol piyas painim by l'chashma etzakam. And this is how we pass in fact. And this is how we pass in maskinim l'lay achbar. This is how we pass in also Baba Basra. And Taisvis concludes, Achshav anu b'ma'arav, we're in the west, France, Germany. So therefore, since we're in the west of Eretz Yisrael, if we turn towards the east to face Eretz Yisrael. Fine. Continues the Gemara. Continues the Gemara as follows. Says the Gemara, Avua de Shmuel v'Levi ki having boy lemefag lo orcha v'mekabni u'matzli. Avua de Shmuel and Levi. So the father of Shmuel and Levi, when they would want to go on a trip, when they're going on, and we don't know exactly what kind of a trip they were doing, but when they would go on a trip, so then having mekabni u'matzli, they would daven early. When they got to Mashiach, they would say Shema. Kiman, who did this go like this? Abu Shmuel and Levi. Kiyaitaina, the Tanya, go like the Tanya from our bride. So Hishkim lets us derech. If somebody wants to go traveling on the road, they bring him a shofar to blow, a lulav to shake, a megillah v'kariba, a megillah to read. Or she gives my Kriya Shema carry, and when the Shema, the Zman of Kriya Shema comes, then he should say the Shema. Hishkim Leisha B'Karna B'Sfina. Somebody's getting on a trip where he's going to be going in a carriage or in a ship. Mispalel, he should daven before that. Or she gives my Kriya Shema carry, and then when he gets to his my Kriya Shema, he should say the Shema. Rav Shimon Elazar, I remember Rav Shimon Elazar disagrees with this. Rav Shimon Elazar says, "Benkach lebenkach kari kriya shema u'mispalel." Person should not daven early; he should rather wait, and then he should daven kriya shema with tefillah with the Shemona Esrei kadesh yisma gula tefillah, in order to be able to be same gula to tefillah. So according to um, Rav Shimon Elazar, you don't daven early. The Shemona Esrei you wait. Even when now you're going to be on the journey, you daven the Shemona Esrei later in order to be Saimech Gula to Tefillah. And since you shouldn't be saying the Shema early, you should wait for the time. So therefore, it will come out. Point to Rav Shimon Elazar is learning it that you're not davening early, you're davening at the appropriate time. And why? Because fundamentally you want to be Saimech Gula to Tefillah. So the Gemara says, "B'may kamafligi." What are they arguing in Avodah Shmuel Levi versus Rav Shimon Elazar? Ma'asav tefillah mu'umin. If one says that the tefillah mu'umin is more important to be able to daven when you're not on the road to stand normally like a mensch, that's more important, more vital. That's Avodah Shmuel Levi. Ma'asav mas megula tefillah. If it's more important to be sem megula to tefillah. Now, before we go any further, I have a fundamental question on this Gemara from the Gemara that we had earlier. We had the Gemara in Chesed base. The Gemara told us two versions, but essentially the Gemara said that b'shas atchak, in effect, a person is able to say the Shema early. A person is able to say the Shema very early. So, why is it that avoid the Shmuel and we passing like this? We're able to say the Shema before Mishayakir. We're able to say Shema from the time of Alais. So why is that not a something that's being practiced by Avodah Shmuel and Levi? If that's how we paskin, then why are Avodah Shmuel and Levi refusing to say Shema until a later point? We said that it could be considered the day because there are people who get up at that time, even though quote unquote it's still the night. It still can be considered day for Shema of the Yom. This is, I think, a pretty fundamental question. Now, look at Taisvis. Taisvis says that Rashi says, if you look at Rashi, Rashi is not 100% as clear as the way Taisvis makes him out to be. What is the case of Avodah Shmuel and Levi when they would leave early? Avodah Shmuel and Levi, when they have to go on the road, they would make their davening early, and then they would say Shema. So the question we have to ask is, what do you mean when you say that Avodah Shmuel and Levi were going on the road, and so they would daven early? How early are we talking about? So if you look at Rashi, Rashi says, having Mikadmi, they would daven early, Kaidem Hayom, before the day. That sounds like, says Taisus, that Rashi holds, that it's before Alais, right? It's before Amud Shachar. So it says it can't be. They would not have gone on the journey if that's the situation. They don't leave until it's Kita, you don't leave until it's the day. They would not have traveled that night. Because it's not the day, they wouldn't travel at night. Therefore, we have to go like the parish, the comment of Rabbeinu Chanana, who holds we're talking about a situation where it was after Alais, it's after Amar Shachar, but it's before Mishiyakir. So therefore, they're not comfortable to say Shema, only Shemona Esrei. We're talking about a situation was already Amar Shachar, they're leaving for Nates. V'adayin einay ikar zman tefillah, and it's still not yet the ikar zman tefillah. All right, so this is the position of Taisus. That Taisus is saying that Rashi says that the person's getting up kaidem hayom, even before the day. So we asked from Rashi, when Rashi says kaidem hayom, he's getting up before the day. What does that mean? He's getting up before the day. Does that mean before our life or not? So we just asked the question. We said, I don't understand, why is Avodah Shmuel not being willing to say Shema? If you can rely on Shimon Shas Chak, then there's no problem. There is a situation where they have to leave early, and they're already davening Shema Esrei, so they should daven Shema also, and they should be saying a gula to tefillah. So Elamai, this must be a raya that Tosfos is reading of Rashi is correct, and that Rashi said Kaidim Hayom. Rashi says that they left early. Tosfos disagrees. Tosfos says they can't have left early because they would not leave at night. But why is Rashi going into a situation not like Rabbeinu Chananel? Why is Rashi seemingly forced to suggest that their davening was after, while it was still night before Amud Shachar? Why can't Rashi say that they're doing it after Amud Shachar? I think the answer and the reason that Rashi forced himself into this knot is because of the fact that Rashi is bothered why they're not saying Shema. If a person is Shasat Chak, they're able to say Shema after Alais, even though it's before Mashiach. So Elamai, what probably is happening is that because Rashi is bothered by why they didn't say Shema, they seem particularly unwilling to say Shema because it was probably halachically unsound to say Shema for the day before Alais. So therefore, Rashi decided to define the situation over here, Shmuel Levi, as being before Amud Shachar. So therefore, they didn't have the ability to say Shema. Perhaps that is an answer to explain Rashi's position. Again, according to Rabbeinu Chananel, I think you have the question. According to Rabbeinu Chananel, he says that they did it after the Alois. So then, what's the problem? You have what to rely on. You can rely on the Rishon Bechai. He says that after Amud Shachar, you're able to already say the Shema for the day because there are people getting up by that time. So why wouldn't they do it? So the Gemara says, the Gemara continues. Merema Umar Zutra have a machan to be asor b'Shabbat to the rigla. Merema and Mar Zutra would grab a minyan together of 10 people when it was the Shabbos of the regal. What does it mean, the Shabbos of the regal? Shalafnei Pesach v'Atzeres. They would have the big Shabbatons, a lot of speeches before Pesach, and Rashi says Atzeres and Shavuos and Sukkot. Right? We have learned in other places that it was usually twice a year. Right? It wasn't 3 times a year; it was twice a year that people would get together for the various drushes. For Nisan because of the Yontif of Pesach, and Tishrei because of the Yom Tovim there. Look at Rashi and Zayin and Beis, where we castigated the people of Masa Machasya for not becoming from. Why? Because they saw Yikra Da'arais, the treasure in the Rishasa. They saw the honor of the Torah, the treasure that people respected the Torah twice a year when people come for the drushes. In Adar to hear about Hilchos Pesach, and in El to hear about Sukkot, etc. So how does Rashi over here say that it's Pesach, Atzeres, and Sukkot? So this is a kasha of Kivega. Either way, so Meremar Be'ira, Marzutra Be'ira, they would be each in their individual cities, and so when they would give the drasha, so as Rashi says, Meremar Be'ira, Marzutra Be'ira, Hayar Darshanim, they were the darshaners. B'shachas hayu ha'am hachal beis hamarish, and during the morning everybody would go to the beis hamarish. Hashem gives my kriyash ma, Karen had darshan, and when Zman kriyash ma would come along. They would say the Shema by Darshan Darish. And the people would separate, and each person would daven alone. They would get together a minyan for Shachas, because it wasn't a normal minyan, so they would get 10 people to come and have a normal minyan before they would go to give the shir. The current Kriyash Shema Mispal, and they would say Shema with Shemana Esrei to be same good with the tefillah of Hadin after the Pirkei and Darshan, and then they would go out to go and give their drasha. So Merema Marzudra having mechan to be asar misham to the regular when it would come time to the big speech and there wasn't time to have a davening before, and so they would daven early and they would say Shema and they would grab a minute together to do all this. Hadin after the Pirkei, and then after they go out for the speech, Ravashi Maslim Hadin Tzibur B'Yachin. Miyoshi Ravashi wouldn't do that. Rashi, when there was these kind of big Shabbos, he would be there, and he would daven with the tzibur, biyachin, right, miyoshev, and he would remain sitting. And they asked him, when he got home, then he would, daven while he was standing. So the Gemara says, Well, Evan Markim Raymo Marzutra. So they asked Ashi, why don't you like Raymo Marzutra? Why not daven early and get a minion? So Amarlo Trichalim is too complicated for me to do that. Well, Evan Mar Kavod Shmuel Levi. So they said to him, well, why don't you be like Avodah Shmuel and Levi? So you don't want to get a minion together, but at least daven, the davening before you go to give this year, before you go to the Beit Medrash. Amalu. It says, I never saw people from the rabbis doing this. So since I never saw anybody of a major rabbi doing this, so it's hard for us to adopt this kind of approach. So what does it come out? It comes out the way that the Gemara seems to be learning is that according to Mereimar and Mar Zutra, ideally, a person should have Damish Manasseh, and ideally, they should have a minion. If they can't do it later, they should do it early. Here, we're not talking about the specific time of early, but you should do it, before you go to the give this year. Rav Ashi wouldn't do that. He would sit with the tzibur and daven with them because he found it too bothersome, too cumbersome to manage that. Um, so therefore, the Gemara asked on Rav Ashi, so why don't you follow the other rabbis? That you should daven Shemon Esrei and Shema beforehand. So he says, no, I can't do that. He says, because I didn't see any great rabbis doing it, so therefore I'm not comfortable to do so. And that leaves us now with we did that thesis as well. All right, so that is the last point that I want to mention here on the Amud. Have a wonderful day.